Hello students, welcome once again. So this is the second part of the lecture which I've shared with you previously. But this part could not be recorded because of the technical error. So here I'm recording it once again. So in this lecture I will be discussing about very briefly about the immune system. So immune system, you all know that it is a physiological system, a defense system, evolved to protect us from attacking foreign organisms, bacteria, fungi, viruses, and parasites. All organisms they have defense system for their protection. Even bacteria, fungi, they have immune system for their protection. Even plants have immune system for their protection. So bacteria and fungi, you all know that they secrete antibiotics for their protection against other microorganisms. Now, among all organisms, vertebrates have the most complex immune system, which is a complicated and dynamic network of cells, molecules, and pathways. So, we are interested in mammalian immune system. So, the fully functional mammalian system immune system involves so many organs, molecules, cells, and pathways in such an interconnected and sometimes circular process that it is often difficult to know where to start. So I have taken these lines as such from QB immunology because these lines tell a lot about our immune system. So the gist of these lines is that our immune system is quite complex because it involves so many organs and cells and molecules and pathways, and the immune responses happen in an interconnected manner, which is quite complex. So this is a picture I've taken from internet to show you how complex our immune system is. So this is cancer immunosuppression. So there is a huge and wide and complex immune response generated against the cancer cells. So you can see many different cells of the immune system, so many different molecules, so many signaling pathways. All this huge response against is generated against the cancer cells. So even though the immune system is quite complex, it is quite interesting, and I'm sure you will also find it interesting and enjoy studying immune system. So we live in a non-sterile environment, and we are all surrounded by pathogens or microorganisms. So in order for these pathogens to infect us, they have to first reach the natural barriers that we have. So So we have chemical, physical, and anatomical barriers, which is our first line of defense. These barriers help protect us against infections. So these are all physical, chemical, and anatomical barriers. So we have epithelial barriers of the skin and mucosal membrane of the gastrointestinal tract and respiratory tract as well as reproductive tract. So skin is the largest, most epithelial barrier, and you know that skin is impermeable to most of the substances. So by being impermeable to the foreign substances, skin gives us protection. And the other thing is that skin has sebaceous glands. So the sebaceous glands they produce sebum. Sebum is a oily waxy material which contain defensin, psoriasin, and some other antimicrobial compounds. So these are antimicrobial compounds which gives us protection against the foreign pathogens. So apart from that, the perspiration sweat that we have, these also contain the sweat also contain antimicrobial compounds and thus gives us protection. So other than that, acidity of the stomach and vagina that also gives protection against the foreign pathogens that enter inside us. try to enter through the stomach and the vaginal route. Then we have lysozymes, and you all know that lysozymes are present in tears and saliva. And lysozymes are antimicrobial, antibacterial compounds. And then we have milk, lactoferrin, which is present in breast milk. So lactoferrin is a potent antimicrobial compound. It is effective against bacteria, viruses, as well as fungi. And the colostrum, the first milk of the mother, that is called colostrum, that is rich in lactoferrin. Last but not least, we have normal microflora, which gives a strong competition to the foreign pathogens and hence gives us protection against the infections. So these are all the physical, chemical, and anatomical barriers which gives us the first line of defense against the foreign pathogens. Now, in case if pathogen breaches these the barriers and get inside our body, then the pathogens then a huge immune response is generated against those pathogens. So the immune response which is generated against inside our body against the pathogens is composed of two interconnected arms, that is innate immune responses and adaptive immune responses, also called innate immunity and adaptive immunity. So the huge immune response is generated against the pathogens. So innate immune response is the early response. Innate immune response is also called the early response, non-specific and inherent. So it is early because it is the one which is generated first. So when the pathogen enters inside our body after reaching the barrier, it first come across with the components of the innate immune responses only. So innate immune responses are the first to generate. That is why it is called early. It is non-specific and it is inherent. Inherent means it is already there. It need not be acquired. Now, the three major components of innate immunity are the phagocytic cells that we have, the phagocytic leukocytes, neutrophils, monocytes, macrophages, and dendritic cells. So these are the phagocytic leukocytes, the first component of the innate immunity. Then we have specialized cell type called the natural killer cells. So natural killer cells are also component of the innate immunity only. Then we have several circulating plasma proteins, the most important of which are proteins of the complement system and inflammation, and these are the third component of the innate immunity. So these are the three major components of the innate immunity. Then we have a process of inflammation. So inflammation is one of the innate immune responses only, which is triggered by infection, tissue damage, or harmful substances. So now coming over to adaptive immunity. So the adaptive immune response is specific and more potent. Immune response against an infectious agent, which is generated 5 to 6 days after the barrier breach. So it is a late, specific, and more potent immune response against the pathogen. So the components of adaptive immune system are lymphocytes and their products. So we have T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, and antibodies. Okay, antibodies are the product of B lymphocytes. So these are the components of adaptive immune system. Now both innate and adaptive immune responses are interlinked together. So whenever some pathogen enters into our body after reaching the barriers, natural barriers, the huge immune response is generated against the pathogen, and it is a complete. It is like comprised of innate as well as adaptive immune responses. So the innate and adaptive immune responses, they are interlinked together. They are dependent on each other. These two responses do not happen independently. So So they are interlinked together. So in order to have a better understanding, let us look at this figure. So this figure shows an overview of immune response, and which is generated against the bacteria. And this figure mainly shows a collaboration between the innate and adaptive immunity in resolving an infection. So this is a whole immune response comprising of innate immunity as well as adaptive immunity generated against the bacteria. So you can see that the bacteria has, in the first step, the bacteria has breached the mucosal lining and entered into the epithelia. So within epithelium, there resides the phagocytic cells. These are resident phagocytic cells. And what these phagocytic cells do, they trap bacteria, engulf them, and break them into pieces. And then they do two things simultaneously. First, they migrate to the nearby lymph node and activate adaptive immune responses. And second thing they do, they release chemokines and cytokines for initiation of inflammation at the site of infection. So what happens in the inflammation? There is influx of fluid to the site of infection as well as recruitment of the immune cells to the site of infection. So within the lymph node, these phagocytic cells, they present the bacteria to T cells and B cells and activate these T and B cells. So T and B cells, they undergo proliferation and differentiation into the effector T cells, B cells, and the memory T and B cells. So the activation of the T and B cells, the components of adaptive immunity, takes place around 5 to 6 days because of the specific nature of the adaptive immune response. Okay, because you know that one T cell will be generated against or effective against only one epitope, and microorganisms, bacteria has hundreds of epitopes. So there takes clonal selection within the lymph node, and it takes 5 to 6 days. So you are going to read about clonal selection theory in your syllabus. So so what happens? Okay, so memory cells are produced. Memory T and B cells are produced in primary response against the bacteria. A primary response means if the bacteria enters into the body for the first time, then primary immune response is generated against the bacteria. So memory T and B cells are generated against the bacteria, and when the bacteria again enters into the body, that is a secondary infection, then the adaptive immune response is much faster and more stronger. Okay, so memory cells, they remain for this the future infections. So the activated T and B cells, then they migrate to this, or they recruited to the site of infection through the blood vessels. So what happens? The B cells, they get differentiated into plasma cells which secrete antibodies. And what these antibodies do? Antibodies do two things. First, they neutralize the bacteria and disable the bacteria so that bacteria cannot do any harm to the system. The second thing they do, they basically neutralize the bacteria, they bind the bacteria from all sides, and they basically opsonize the bacteria. This is called opsonization also, and that helps the phagocytic cells to engulf the bacteria, to phagocytose it. So antibodies, which are the components of adaptive immune response, help phagocytic cells to phagocytose it and thus enhance the immune response. Thereby the immune response is enhanced against the bacteria. So you can see the two components of the immune response, the innate immune response as well as the adaptive immune response. They are generated in the, or they work in the interconnected manner. Okay, so here the phagocytic cells, they help activation of the adaptive immune response. Phagocytic cells are the cells components of the innate immune response, and T and B cells are the components of adaptive immune response. So phagocytic cells activate T and B cells. Without the components of innate immune response, the adaptive immune responses cannot be generated. Okay, and then the antibodies which are formed, they again further help the phagocytic cells to phagocytose more and more of the bacteria, and thus enhanced immune response is generated. So both the immune responses, they help in a they work in a interconnected manner. So this is a rather simple representation of the immune response, and I hope you got it. And you can go. This picture has been taken from QB. You can go through the picture and read it. So your assignment is, you please go through the chapters immune overview of immune system from QB and introduction to the immune system by Abul K. Abbas. So you have to go through and read these chapters. And next we will talk about these, because this was just an overview. So we'll discuss all the points in detail in further lectures. Thank you and bye bye.